This year, JavaScript has released a lot of cool features, and some of them are actually on stage 4, which means they're gonna be official soon. And in this video, I just want to summarize them in case if you missed those. So let's start with an iterator. So what are iterators? Let's say we have an array called numbers. An array of numbers is an iterable. And as soon as we call this method values, oops, I broke it. As soon as we call this here, it becomes an iterator. So the difference is an array is basically a set of numbers like this. And every time you iterate over it or loop over it, you're going to accomplish the whole thing at once from the beginning to the end. But with iterators, we have this special method called next. And every time we call next, or the iterator is going to yield one value at a time. So the first time we call next, we're going to get 1. The second time we call next here, we're going to get 2 and then 3. So you get the idea. Now you might ask, what is the purpose of these iterators? Let's say you're manipulating these arrays. So if you're doing an operation on a very, very large amount of data in the array, let's say it's kind of a video processing, right? It's maybe a task that never ends. So on the backend, you're constantly processing some data. There are such use cases as well. You don't want to create intermediate arrays, but you want to tackle one value at a time. And these new features is basically saying that we now have all of these cool methods that we didn't have before. So let's go over to the documentation and you see that iterator now has gotten all these methods that basically arrays have. And this is pretty much very cool. Now, there's also a thing called generators. Well, generators are very similar to iterators. The only thing is that they are functions. So they can be a bit more advanced, meaning you can tag or you can do more things with inside the function. And then as soon as you do yield and then you increment the value, you're basically going to get the same result here. Now, let's take a look at browser compatibility. And we're going to see that iterators are still not fully supported in Safari. I mean, at least they are, but there are some that are not. For example, dispose, and basically the rest is already supported. So from my point of view, you can safely use these iterator methods. Now, the second point would be sets. So sets are something that we've been using a lot in the last years, but primarily for getting rid of unique values. So let's say if our set has 2 times 2, so 1, 2, and 2 times 2. As soon as you create a set, it's basically going to get rid of the duplicates and we're going to end up with an array like this, or rather like a set like this. And now we're actually able to use a lot of cool methods here. So for example, if you want to get the union of A and B, it's basically going to give you a set with the union. We can also get the intersection, difference, symmetric difference, is subset of, superset of, and disjoint from. Very similar to database manipulation. So you basically get the idea. JavaScript is now more powerful than before. Let's take a look at sets and see what the browser compatibility looks like. And it's very green. So you can go ahead and already use it in your new applications. The next point is errors. So Error.isError is the new cool thing that helps us a lot when dealing or when trying to tackle errors, all right? Or catch the errors. So basically, before what we did is, let's say we have a worker thread and we're trying to declare there's worker thread, but for some reason it fails. And every time we try to see whether we can do something with this error, we first have to validate that it's an instance of an error. And every time we do this, actually error is not going to be an instance of a real error that's native to JavaScript. So it's going to be false because this is a different realm. Different realm means it's not the browser and it's not the main thread of Node.js. This is, in this case, it's worker threads. The same would be if you're trying to catch an error from an iframe. So if this error is coming from an iframe, or if this frame is coming from a virtual machine. As you can see, we can have different realms. And basically this new feature, this one, Error.isError method. And if you pass an error inside, you can basically validate that it is an error and then you can proceed handling it. For example, if you pass new error inside isError method, you're going to get true. Also, if you pass a type error, you're also going to get true. If you pass an oops, it's basically a string, so it's not an error, you're going to get false. And if you just pass a dump message, it also knows that it's not an actual error. So you have to basically throw it. Okay, now let's take a look at the browser compatibility, and we will see that it's pretty much supported, not fully in Safari, but there's just one feature missing. So you can go ahead and use this too. And it's supported from Node.js 24, version 24 and onwards. Now let's take a look at this feature called using. Now we can have classes which are doing some operation, right? Now, if you don't know what symbols are arbitrary keys that you can define. Let's say you can define const x equals new symbol, and then you can pass my x, and then you can basically, obviously this is not going to work inside the class, but you can basically use this symbol x, or actually I think you can do it like this. And in this case, we're using something called async dispose. Now, what is the meaning of use here? So as you can see, our connection is having a constructor and it says connected as soon as this class gets instantiated. And we also have an async symbol called async dispose. Now, what async dispose is doing, it's basically going to detect as soon as this class is outside running scope and it finished whatever it was doing, we're going to automatically close the connection and basically garbage collect the class. Now, you can see that our run method is basically creating this instance of a connection called con, and it has this keyword called using. So what using is doing, it's basically looking for the brackets that are surrounding it. In this case, it's our function called run, and it knows that as soon as this run method has finished, it's going to look for this symbol async dispose, and it's going to clear the class from the memory. How cool is that? Also, it can just do dispose instead of async dispose. This is the synchronous way, but I just wanted to show you that you can use async dispose as well. Now, what are the use cases? For example, if you have a database connection and the database connection crashes, this class is automatically going to be garbage collected and disposed, so there are no dangling connections or retries. And the same can be done for example, input or output operations like file reading or writing into a file. So basically using this inside some kind of a bracket is going to make your class very clean whenever it comes to memory management. Now let's take a look at the official documentation, and we will see that we go to the up, we'll see that the using declaration declares a block scope local variables that are synchronously disposed, like const. Variables declared with using must be initialized and cannot be reassigned. As you can see, the browser compatibility is kind of in the middle, in between, because this is like a really new feature that came out this year. So Safari doesn't really support it, and Node.js doesn't support it either yet. Now let's talk about the next feature, which is Regex escape function. So let's say we have some kind of a user input, let's say from a input field on the front end. And what we would normally do in order to escape this user input, to make sure that before we put it into a regex, we need to make sure that there are no special characters that would ruin our regex. We have to basically do this replace, and every time we find one of these guys, we're basically going to replace them, okay? Now with the new escape method, we can basically pass this input inside, and it's automatically going to get rid of this escape all these extra characters. As you can see, the dot as well as the question. And now our escaped, or our user input is escaped. And now when it's escaped, we can safely pass it into our regex and a created regex without knowing that it's not going to fail or cause any issues. This is also very important in terms of security. So keep it in mind, and let's take a look at the browser compatibility, and we'll see that it's pretty much supported everywhere except Opera, and nobody cares about Samsung Internet. So I would say wait a couple of months and we're good to go. Now let's talk about Promise.tries. So Promise.tries are probably my favorite feature out of all of these. So the old way you would deal with a promise or create a promise is you would pass a function inside, which is an anonymous function, and you would do try catch usually, and you can either resolve it or reject it with an error. And of course you can catch the error here. Now the new way with Promise.try is basically passing anonymous function where you will try to do something, and it's automatically going to give you a result. So you don't have to even do this resolve thingy, and you don't have to reject anything. You can automatically kind of use .then and .catch, and this saves a lot of boilerplate code. All right. Same thing applies to async methods or async functions. You can just do Promise.try and pass in an async function. Let's say you're waiting for some kind of a data, and if data is have come back, then you process it, and then you can do .then or .catch. This is probably the best feature, in my opinion, that have come recently. And let's take a look at the browser compatibility, and we'll see that it's supported pretty much everywhere. And starting from Node.js version 23, you can actually use it in Node.js as well. Now, talking about Node.js, we know that Node.js also has these native fetch. So there's no longer a need for Axios. You can basically use the native JavaScript fetch in order to fetch data and do HTTP calls. Also, speaking of Node.js, we also have a support for native test runners, meaning there's no need to use these Mocha or Jasmine. You literally can just use a test runner from Node, and this is how you would run your test and simply run it from your terminal, and Node is already able to do tests without any external libraries. How cool is that? We talked about a lot of interesting stuff. If you're interested in this kind of detailed videos, you can check out my video on performance of JavaScript. Also quite a deep and technical video. Go check it out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.